ExamPrep.School. Wyoming Surplus Lines Insurance Broker Exam. Exam code 12-WY-82 or OP-WY-82. There are 5 practice exams in this series. This video covers Practice Exam 1. The first 20 questions are free. In this video, we will be covering the following major categories for Practice Exam 1. Contracts, general insurance definitions, policies, coverages, and forms, surplus lines markets, Wyoming insurance laws and regulations, Wyoming surplus lines specific laws and regulations. Let's walk through the format. I'll read each question and its choices. Let's get started. Question 1. In the context of insurance, how is pure risk defined? A. Risk involving only the possibility of loss or no loss. B. Risk involving a chance of gain, loss, or no change. C. Risk evaluated by insurers using probability distributions. D. Risk associated exclusively with speculative market fluctuations. A countdown circle appears in the top right. Once it completes, the answer is revealed. You can pause at any time if you'd like longer to think. If you'd like additional practice covering more topics, see the description for our book. The correct answer is A. Pure risk refers to exposures where only loss or no loss can occur, without any possibility of financial gain. Reason B is not correct. This describes speculative risk by including the possibility of gain, which pure risk excludes. Reason C is not correct. The evaluation method is not part of the definition of pure risk, which focuses on outcome possibilities. Reason D is not correct. Speculative market fluctuations are not the sole domain of pure risk, which applies to many hazards beyond markets. Question 2. Which of the following types of risk would typically be excluded from surplus lines coverage due to its speculative nature? A. Commodity futures trading. B. Fire damage to property. C. Theft of a vehicle. D. Damage from a windstorm. The correct answer is A. Speculative risks like commodity futures trading involve potential financial gain and loss and are generally excluded from surplus lines coverage. Reason B is not correct. Fire damage represents a pure risk with loss or no loss outcomes and is insurable. Reason C is not correct. Vehicle theft is a pure risk scenario characterized by loss without gain potential. Reason D is not correct. Windstorm damage is a pure risk with no opportunity for financial gain, making it insurable. Question 3. A coastal storage facility insures its inventory against hurricane damage. Following a storm, reports indicate that water seepage from a poorly maintained roof increased the extent of loss. In this context, which term correctly identifies the peril and which term correctly identifies the hazard? A. Peril, hurricane damage. Hazard, poorly maintained roofing. B. Peril, water seepage. Hazard, hurricane damage. C. Peril, poorly maintained roofing. Hazard, water seepage. D. Peril, water seepage. Hazard, poorly maintained roofing. The correct answer is A. The correct answer identifies hurricane damage as the peril, which is the direct cause of loss, and poorly maintained roofing as the hazard, which is the condition that increases the likelihood or severity of loss. Reason B is not correct. This response reverses the roles by treating water seepage as the peril and hurricane damage as the hazard, misidentifying the direct cause and contributing factor. Reason C is not correct. This misidentifies the roofing condition as the peril and water seepage as the hazard, rather than recognizing the direct cause of loss and the risk-enhancing condition. Reason D is not correct. This answer correctly notes the hazard, but mistakenly lists water seepage as the peril instead of recognizing hurricane damage as the direct cause of loss. Question 4. Under Wyoming statute, Title 26, Chapter 2, Section 7, insurable interest in property for an insurance contract must exist at which point in time? A. At the moment the insured peril occurs and causes loss. B. At the effective date specified in the policy declarations. C. At the time the policy application is submitted. D. At the moment the insured first pays the initial premium. The correct answer is A. The correct answer is that insurable interest must exist at the moment the insured peril occurs and causes loss, as required by the cited Wyoming statute. Reason B is not correct. Wyoming law does not require insurable interest to exist merely at the policy's effective date. It must exist at loss. Reason C is not correct. Submission of the application does not satisfy the timing requirement. Insurable interest is tested when loss occurs. Reason D is not correct. Payment of premium is unrelated to the statutory requirement that insurable interest be present at loss. Question 5. Under Wyoming surplus lines regulations, the pecuniary interest test establishes insurable interest based primarily on which criterion? A. The insured's ownership of legal title in the property. B. The moral obligation to indemnify another's loss. C. The duration of the insured's equitable interest in the subject risk. D. The extent of financial loss the person would suffer from damage or destruction. The correct answer is D. The pecuniary interest test focuses on the extent of financial loss that would be suffered from damage or destruction rather than legal title, equitable interest duration, or moral obligation. Reason A is not correct. Legal title ownership alone is not the measure under the pecuniary interest test. Reason B is not correct. Moral obligation is not a factor in the pecuniary interest test for surplus lines. Reason C is not correct. The test does not hinge on how long an equitable interest is held. Question 6. Which pairing accurately defines the duty and breach elements of negligence? A. Duty, proof of intentional misconduct. Breach, determination of proximate cause. B. Duty, establishment of causation between conduct and injury. Breach, existence of actual damages. C. Duty, demonstration of emotional distress. Breach, proof of foreseeability of harm. D. Duty, obligation to conform to reasonable person standard. Breach, failure to meet that standard. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is defined by legal doctrine. Duty requires a standard of care measured by a reasonable person, and breach is failing to meet that standard. Reason A is not correct. Intentional misconduct and proximate cause are unrelated to the definitions of duty and breach. Reason B is not correct. This incorrectly describes duty and breach as causation and damages, which are separate elements. Reason C is not correct. Emotional distress and foreseeability relate to damages and proximate cause, not duty and breach. Question 7. In tort law, which causation standard applies when an act is one of multiple sufficient causes of harm? A. But for causation test. B. Foreseeability from proximate cause analysis. C. Substantial factor test. D. Res ipsa loquitur inference. The correct answer is C. This option is correct because the substantial factor test is used to establish cause and fact when multiple actions independently could have caused the injury. Reason A is not correct. The but-for test fails when there are multiple independent sufficient causes. Reason B is not correct. Foreseeability relates to legal scope of liability, not cause and fact among several causes. Reason D is not correct. Res ipsa loquitur creates a presumption of negligence, not a standard for causation among multiple causes. Question 8. Under Wyoming insurance law, which of the following most accurately defines an admitted insurer? A. An insurer domiciled in Wyoming that only provides surplus lines coverage. B. An insurer authorized to transact insurance in Wyoming and subject to its rate and form filings. C. An insurer chartered in an adjacent state and exempt from Wyoming's policy filing requirements. So D. An insurer operating without a certificate of authority but approved for non-admitted business. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is an insurer holding a certificate of authority in Wyoming and subject to the state's regulatory requirements for rates and forms. Reason A is not correct. That option describes a surplus lines carrier, which is non-admitted, not an admitted insurer. Reason C is not correct. Chartering in another state and exemption from filings applies to non-admitted insurers, not admitted ones. Reason D is not correct. Operating without a certificate of authority defines a non-admitted insurer, not an admitted one. Question 9. According to Wyoming surplus lines regulations, a non-admitted insurer becomes eligible to write surplus lines business in Wyoming if it A. is licensed to write admitted business in any state but not listed on the NAIC quarterly listing. B. appears on the NAIC quarterly listing of alien and foreign insurers eligible to write surplus lines. C. maintains a certificate of authority in its domicile but lacks required capital surplus. D. holds an admitted insurer license in Wyoming but elects surplus line status. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is that a surplus lines carrier must be listed on the NAIC's quarterly publication of eligible non-admitted insurers to write surplus lines in Wyoming. Reason A is not correct. Absence from the NAIC list disqualifies the insurer from surplus lines eligibility in Wyoming. Reason C is not correct. Capital requirements relate to admitted insurers and do not grant non-admitted eligibility for surplus lines. Reason D is not correct. An admitted license in Wyoming subjects the insurer to admitted market rules, not surplus lines regulations. Question 10. A Wyoming surplus lines broker is evaluating Pangea underwriters, an alien insurer domiciled abroad, to write a high-value commercial property risk in Wyoming. Under Wyoming surplus lines law, which of the following actions must Pangea complete before it can be deemed eligible for placement? A. File a detailed claim reserve schedule with the Wyoming Insurance Commissioner. B. Obtain a certificate of authority from the Wyoming Office of Insurance. C. Deposit the required trust fund assets with the Wyoming State Treasurer. D. Maintain a minimum paid-in capital of at least $1 million in U.S. dollars. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is depositing the required trust fund assets with the Wyoming State Treasurer. Wyoming law mandates that alien insurers establish a trust deposit in order to secure obligations to Wyoming insureds before being listed as eligible for surplus lines placement. The other actions filing claim reserve schedules, obtaining a certificate of authority in Wyoming, or maintaining a specified paid-in capital are not prerequisites under Wyoming surplus lines eligibility rules for alien insurers. Reason A is not correct. Filing claim reserve schedules is not a prerequisite for eligibility to write surplus lines business under Wyoming law. Reason B is not correct. Obtaining a Wyoming certificate of authority applies to admitted insurers, not to alien insurers writing surplus lines. Reason D is not correct. There is no Wyoming surplus lines requirement that an alien insurer maintain a fixed $1 million paid-in capital in U.S. dollars. Question 11. Under Wyoming insurance law, which of the following most accurately defines a domestic insurer? A. An insurance entity organized in any U.S. state other than Wyoming. B. An insurer with its principal place of business located in Wyoming. C. An insurance company incorporated or organized under the laws of Wyoming. D. An insurer holding a Wyoming certificate of authority to transact business. The correct answer is C. A domestic insurer is one that is chartered or organized under Wyoming laws. Incorporation under state law establishes its domestic status. Reason A is not correct. An insurer organized in another state is classified as foreign, regardless of other factors. Reason B is not correct. Having the principal place of business in Wyoming does not establish legal domicile under state law. Reason D is not correct. Possession of a certificate of authority permits business operations but does not determine domicile. Question 12. A foreign insurer domiciled in Bermuda recently applied to the Wyoming Insurance Commissioner for a certificate of authority to transact surplus lines business. The insurer submitted a certified copy of its charter, a certificate of good standing from its domiciliary regulator, and 3 years of audited financial statements. The commissioner returned the application as incomplete. Which mandatory requirement did the insurer fail to submit? A. A certified copy of its reinsurance treaty with its primary reinsurer. B. A letter from a Wyoming surplus lines broker endorsing its credit rating. C. A formal filing of each surplus lines policy form for prior regulatory approval. D. An irrevocable consent to service of process appointing the Wyoming Commissioner as agent for service. The correct answer is D. Wyoming law requires every foreign insurer seeking authority to file an irrevocable consent to service of process, designating the commissioner as its agent for service, to ensure enforceability of legal actions. Reason A is not correct. Reinsurance treaties are governed by separate filing requirements and are not mandatory components for the initial certificate of authority application. Reason B is not correct. No statute requires a broker endorsement letter for a foreign insurer's certificate of authority submission. Reason C is not correct. Surplus lines policy forms need not be filed for prior approval as a condition of obtaining a certificate of authority. Question 13. Under Wyoming surplus lines regulations, what is the minimum insured value that defines a high-value dwelling eligible for excess property coverage placement? A. $1 million. B. $1,500,000. C. $2 million. D. $2,500,000. The correct answer is B. The correct threshold for classifying a high-value dwelling under Wyoming surplus lines rules is $1,500,000, which permits placement of excess property coverage in the surplus market. Reason A is not correct. This amount falls below the required threshold and therefore does not qualify as a high-value dwelling under the regulations. Reason C is not correct. This amount exceeds the actual regulatory threshold, making it higher than necessary to meet the requirement. Reason D is not correct. This amount is substantially above the statutory minimum and is not the defined threshold for high-value dwellings. Question 14. Under Wyoming surplus lines law, a surplus lines broker must document declinations from how many admitted insurers before placing a difficult-to-place general liability risk, such as an amusement park, in the surplus lines market? A. 2. B. 3. C. 4. D. 5. The correct answer is B. Wyoming regulations require that a broker approach and document declinations from at least 3 admitted insurers before classifying a general liability risk as eligible for surplus lines placement. Reason A is not correct. Approaching only 2 insurers does not satisfy the minimum solicitation requirement under the statute. Reason C is not correct. Soliciting 4 insurers exceeds the regulatory minimum but is not required for eligibility. Reason D is not correct. Soliciting 5 insurers is more than the statutory requirement and therefore is not the defined minimum. Question 15. A Wyoming surplus lines broker is approached by a cryptocurrency exchange seeking professional liability coverage for smart contract vulnerabilities. The broker requested quotes from 3 admitted insurers, but each either declined coverage or offered limits below the client's requirements. Under Wyoming surplus lines regulations for non-standard lines, what action must the broker take before placing coverage with a non-admitted insurer? A. Verify that the selected non-admitted insurer appears on Wyoming's eligible surplus lines insurer list without additional documentation. B. Secure at least one binding offer from an admitted insurer, even if the limit is below the client's requested amount, before proceeding to a non-admitted insurer. C. Obtain a written affidavit documenting each solicited admitted insurer's declination or insufficient limit offers. D. Remit the required stamping fee to the Wyoming stamping office prior to issuing the policy with the non-admitted insurer. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is to obtain a written affidavit showing that admitted insurers either declined coverage or offered inadequate limits, which satisfies the diligent search requirement before placing coverage on a surplus lines basis. Reason A is not correct. Merely confirming that a non-admitted insurer is on the eligible list does not meet the statutory requirement to document attempts in the admitted market. Reason B is not correct. Securing an insufficient limit offer from an admitted insurer does not eliminate the need to document that each insurer was unable to meet the full risk, which is the core diligent search requirement. Reason D is not correct. Paying the stamping fee is a subsequent step after placement and does not satisfy the prior requirement to document admitted market declinations. Question 16. Under Wyoming surplus lines law, which best defines an insurance exchange? A. A network of insureds and brokers formed to share high-risk exposures among themselves. B. A joint underwriting association of admitted insurers for commercial casualty coverages. C. A reinsurance pool through which admitted insurers cede catastrophic risks to one another. D. A state-authorized entity providing a facility, including a stamping office, for placing surplus lines insurance with non-admitted insurers. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is a state-authorized entity that maintains a stamping office and coordinates the placement of surplus lines insurance with eligible non-admitted insurers under Wyoming law. Reason A is not correct. Describes risk sharing among insureds and brokers rather than a statutory placement facility for non-admitted insurers. Reason B is not correct. Defines a joint underwriting association of admitted insurers, not a non-admitted insurer exchange. Reason C is not correct. Refers to a reinsurance arrangement among admitted insurers, not a surplus lines placement mechanism. Question 17. An insurance broker who is a member of a surplus lines exchange receives a client request for specialized property coverage. According to exchange membership rules, what responsibility does the broker hold in facilitating placement within the exchange? A. Underwrite and assume the risk on behalf of the exchange. B. Submit the coverage request first to admitted carriers before approaching exchange options. C. Act as the exchange's liaison, submitting the application to approved member carriers. D. Establish premium rates based on the exchange's financial performance. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is that broker members serve as liaisons between clients and the exchange's approved non-admitted carriers by submitting applications on behalf of clients under the exchange's guidelines. Reason A is not correct. Underwriting and assuming risk is the function of the carriers, not broker members within an exchange. Reason B is not correct. Exchange placements involve direct submission to approved non-admitted carriers rather than to admitted carriers first. Reason D is not correct. Premium rates are set by carriers or exchange governance, not by individual broker members. Question 18. According to Wyoming surplus lines regulations, an offer contained in a surplus lines binder is deemed accepted and thus binding on the insurer at which of the following points? A. When the broker executes the binder and delivers it to the applicant. B. When the stamping office receives the binder premium. C. When the stamping office issues approval for the binder. D. when the insurer or its authorized representative executes the binder form. The correct answer is D. Under Wyoming surplus lines regulations, acceptance of a binder offer occurs upon execution by the insurer or its authorized representative, which constitutes mutual assent and binds the insurer to the coverage. Reason A is not correct. Execution and delivery by the broker alone does not bind the insurer without insurer execution. Reason B is not correct. Premium receipt by the stamping office is administrative and does not signify insurer acceptance. Reason C is not correct. Stamping office approval is a filing formality and does not constitute insurer's acceptance of the offer. Question 19. In a binding insurance contract, the consideration furnished by the insured is legally constituted by which of the following? A. The insured's payment of premium accompanied by the good faith representations in the application. B. Insured's agreement to submit to periodic risk inspection audits. C. A covenant by the insured to procure reinsurance for covered perils. D. The insured's undertaking to maintain loss prevention equipment throughout the policy period. The correct answer is A. In insurance contract law, the insured's consideration consists of paying the agreed premium and making truthful representations in the application, which together form the insured's part of the contractual exchange. Reason B is not correct. Agreeing to audits is an obligation, but not the bargained-for exchange that constitutes insured's consideration. Reason C is not correct. Procuring reinsurance is not the insured's promised exchange in a primary policy contract. Reason D is not correct. Maintaining equipment is a policy condition, not the consideration furnished by the insured. Question 20. A Wyoming surplus lines broker meets with a prospective insured who appears visibly intoxicated and slurs speech. The client insists on finalizing the policy immediately. According to the competent parties requirement for brokers, what action must the broker take? A. Request a medical evaluation to confirm sobriety before proceeding. B. Postpone the policy execution until the client has regained sobriety. C. Include an explicit intoxication disclaimer in the policy terms. D. Have the client sign a waiver acknowledging the contract may be voidable due to intoxication. The correct answer is B. The broker must delay contract formation until the client is sober to ensure the agreement is made between competent parties, as intoxication renders a contract voidable. Reason A is not correct. Brokers are not required to obtain formal medical tests. Recognizing visible intoxication and postponing is sufficient to ensure capacity. Reason C is not correct. A disclaimer does not cure incapacity. An intoxicated party's agreement remains voidable regardless of policy language. Reason D is not correct. A waiver cannot validate a contract formed while one party lacks legal capacity due to intoxication. Enjoyed this practice test? Tap like, hit subscribe, and share it with a classmate. Got a question we should tweak? Comment below, we read them all. Find full practice exam books in the description or at ExamPrep.School.